Welcome back to the PFC podcast. The views and opinions you are about to hear are the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of anyone else. Now on to the podcast.
Welcome back to the PFC podcast. This is Dennis, and today I'm with Steve. How are you doing today?
Good. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So, since this is the first time on the podcast, would you mind doing just a quick introduction to yourself?
Sure. I'm Stephen Blocker. Currently, I'm the CEO of Muru. I've been a firefighter paramedic now for about 17 years out of New York. That's a little bit about me.
Nice. I guess what is Muru?
Oh yeah, sure. So we are a software company that's like a protocol app, right? So it's classically called clinical decision support. It pretty much takes the books that you guys are following, right? Anything from like the ATP to CPGs, Ranger Medic Handbook, things like that. And you can just ask it any question, it'll answer. So it'll know your SF and you're coming from this location or something else like that. And we'll just answer those questions live as you're treating a patient. We're big in New York with official app for New York State and through a bunch of different places within the DoD.
Nice. Perfect. So even though you're pretty humble about it, I know you're the perfect guy to talk about this because I want to know about AI in pre-hospital medicine specifically. So, your company, you have an AI model. I've played with ChatGPT. I've played with Grok. I've all these other things, doing stupid pictures and making myself laugh. What can AI do for me in my job? Like I've heard of like ChatGPT, and you type in vital signs and it says you have cancer, like go to the hospital immediately, and it turns out it was correct. You see those stories all the time. Should I just be downloading ChatGPT on my phone and just use that instead?
Right. Yeah. So it's a really interesting question, right? I would say AI's picked up a lot in mainstream consumer, we call it, popularity in the last 2 years. And there's been a ton of development in it. But like AI's been around for a really long time, right? Like AI is not new. It's been around since we all probably can remember tech in general in one form or another. And so, yeah, it is a really good thing to use. I think you have to really understand the bounds of where it's good and where it's not today to know what you can use it for. And so there's like a little background on that. I think that we should kind of like cover with that. So good for different things with diagnoses and things like that. But you got to really understand what it can do well and what it can't, kind of how to use the tool properly.
Okay. So if I was able to put it on my phone, can I just turn the camera on and point it at my patient and then it'll tell me what I need to do?
Yeah. So first, I think we should talk about where it can currently survive, like where it can currently work, right? So for definitely a lot of your guys listening, right? Like most AI can't be used offline, specifically not on a phone, right? It could probably be used on a laptop, but not on a phone. And the response time that you're used to seeing when you do have a stable internet connection is way faster than the response time you're going to get when you're operating it on a laptop. I don't think we're at the point yet where we can just turn the camera and be like, hey, look at this patient and go. I think we needed to use it a lot more focused than that. But yeah, it is usable, but not to that level yet.
Okay. So kind of back to my original question, like what can I do? There are a bunch of different models. They seem like they're good at different stuff. Can you help me sort through this?
Sure. Yeah. So I think like the first thing to talk about is like the few different types of AI there are, kind of some of the mainstream ones you're using or different ones use different technology. And so there's like large language models, right? That's your ChatGPTs, your Geminis, your Groks, things like that. And then you have like natural language processing, right? Which is stuff that's been around for a while, way more kind of fine-tuned over a longer period of time. And then you have things like computer vision, right? And those are the things that actually do image generation or better off identify, right? Look at images and identify what they're looking at. And I think there's like different reasons to use each one and different things that use them in different ways. So like, I think the most important thing here, right, when we're looking at healthcare tech, right, is that we got to be like really worried about like the compliance and the trust level, right? So any tech we use in healthcare, right? How much can we trust that it's giving us the right answer? How much can we trust the data it's working off of? Things like that. And, I think with the large language models, right, that level is somewhat lower than with natural language processing and other technology that's been around for a little longer. And so I think it's important to kind of delineate between the two and what different things are using. So if you talk, I kind of guess the first point here is to say when we're looking at what tech we should be using in healthcare, right, always want to be cutting edge, but also want to understand the bounds of what it can do. So I would say in that vein, right, when we're talking about what the AI does, right, let's talk about a GPT or another large language model. It will always answer a question with complete confidence that it's right? It's rarely gonna, if ever, be I'm not sure. I think a really important part of that is to understand that what it's saying it thinks is correct, but it doesn't actually understand what correct and incorrect is, right? It just knows that it's a really good next word guesser, right? It knows probability and what the percentage chance is that the next word is the most likely next word to come up. And it's doing that based on looking across the internet and just based on the frequency of things it sees, right? If it sees something that says says something 20 times or something else says something once, right? That's going to be a very different, it's going to assume that the 20 times one is correct, right? Or the 20 times one should be the answer it should give. But it doesn't understand true false, right? It's not binary. It's not this is true, this is false, right? It's just, I see this coming up a lot. So I'm going to say that that's the answer I should give, right? And then when you ask and kind of it goes from there. Even when you ask this stuff to explain back to you and be hey, how did you come to that answer? It's not actually explainability, also part of large language models, is something they're really still working on now. It doesn't actually explain how it got the answer it gave itself. It simply gives you what it thinks is the best sounding thing to answer. So the actual answer of how it got to there isn't there as well. So I think that's a little bit of the background on kind of how to understand what that is. Versus if you go with natural language processing and other algorithms that feed off that sort of stuff, right? Those things have been around for a way longer period of time. And even though they're part of AI, right, they're able to way more specifically follow exactly what you're asking and execute only what you ask. Versus with a large language model, it's kind of making its own choice on where to take you down that road.
Okay. So large language model like ChatGPT, write me a report on whatever and you get whatever. Versus natural language model, is that Grammarly or something like that?
It's infused into a lot of different things. It's been something that's, when you can ask a classic search engine a question, right, and it's analyzing that question about how you ask, it gets you the right answer. That's kind of more of the natural language processing. Think of natural language processing as no matter how you ask it, it's getting you the right answer, versus a large language model is, regardless of what the question you're asking, I'm going to choose the response I'm going to give you, and you're not in the driver's seat, I'm making those choices, right? And so that's an interesting way to think about it. What I would say as far as reliability then is like you said, our engineers, right, use large language models all the time to help them code, right? If I want to write an email and I need it to sound better, that's great, right? It'll just answer that, right? And even when our guys code, right, translating from one language in tech to another language in tech when you're coding, also amazing, right? It's all part of language. But I think the point is to say that our engineers always have to fact check and proofread everything that comes out of it, right? So if you're going to a Grok, you're going to a GPT, right? It's always proofreading everything that you're saying. You have to proofread all of it. You have to make sure all of it's right, because there could be a single line in there that's incorrect through a sea of other things that sound right. And it's not really, you always have to check it, right? Because a single word is just statistically the next word that should come up, not actually part of the thesis of the diagnosis. So you'll see talking about something and you'll go through things and you'll go, oh, wait, what? That med, that's not the med you were talking about 30 seconds ago when you said this is meant to be applied, and then you gave me a different dose and it's a completely different medication, or it's a similar medication, right? It doesn't understand those relationships.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, your company, I understand, you essentially shove all the protocols in there protocols from different places, and you're like, I'm working in whatever place in the country or world. I want to know fentanyl, and it's just going to start bringing up fentanyl and dosing ranges, contraindicate, like all of what you want, and it's waiting for you to fill in what specifically would you like to know about this. And then I'm guessing it comes down to like a handful of things that you can click on, and then it tells you. Is that about right?
Yeah, it depends on which type of thing we're talking about. But yes, if it's a large language model, right, it's kind of just scouring the internet, and whatever it saw was a frequent thing, it's pulling up, right? And more of like a different type of model, right? Like some of the stuff we use, right, is more kind of, it is only factual, right? It's not doing the same type of statistics for guessing. So there's differences there. So I think like asking about kind of where you should use this, with like a large language model, right? Like the ones you're pulling up. I think there's like a few different like really cool ways to use it, ways that I've used it before, right? So like some of it will be baked into other products you already see, right? So like you'll take a portable ultrasound with you, and it'll help like the edges be less fuzzy on the ultrasound, or like an X-ray, right? They'll do that. If you're going to show these things, like those images, it can very easily help clean up that image, right? Help look through thousands of images we've seen before and help kind of point out what it thinks might be wrong in that image. I think that's like a really cool way to do it. You could do the same thing with an EKG, right? You could literally print out the EKG or take a picture of it and upload it, and it should be able to look at that EKG and guess as to what's going on there. So I think that's one really interesting use. Another one is actually, if you're giving a bunch of meds in the field and you just want to kind of fastly take that all in, you could literally throw some empty saline bags and a bunch of vials, and as long as they can see the images, you could just take an image of the whole thing, picture the whole thing, and be like, write down everything I just used, everything in this image I used. And it should be able to say, like, it sees 2 liters of normal saline, 2 1-liter bags, and it'll just say, hey, I did 2 liters of normal saline. It should be able to say, like, oh, I see antibiotics here. I also see 2 vials of ketamine. I'm going to add those 2 together to say that's the total amount given, right? Like those things, and classifying images is also something it's pretty good at. And that's another way that you can use it pretty easily. And then the third way, I think, is the education side, right? I think like, hey, I've been out for a few months. Like I see all these new CPGs came out. I see these new guidelines came out, right? Here's a bunch of transcripts from 5 different podcasts talking about this stuff. Like create a quiz here's all that data, right? Create a quiz for me on all of it, right? Give me a 50-question quiz on it, so that I can keep myself fresh on that material, right? I think that's a really cool and really useful way to do it, right? Because then it's looking through that content and throwing it back at you. Again, might get the question wrong or the answer wrong sometimes, so you'll have to sometimes check it, but it's really good at that as well.
Okay. What about things like patient monitoring? Especially when you're talking about like prolonged field care, like people just get tired, right? And the vital signs start to not happen as routinely as you'd like them to do, things like that. Is this, I don't know if it's already out there. I would imagine it's somewhere or somebody's thinking about it. But hey, if, blood pressure comes out of a range, alert me. Heart rate, same thing. Respiratory, like you give all these kind of parameters, and then it essentially watches your patient for you and will alert you if there's some kind of variance.
Yeah, so I think that tech's out there, right? Like that tech's been out there for a while, right? Vital signs monitoring. I don't think you could just like hook up another machine to a large language model, just tell it to start doing that. I think there's a bit of technical skill you would need to kind of constantly feed that data in and have it keep looking at the trend and then rerunning it. But yeah, that tech's definitely like vital signs monitoring kind of software definitely can do that stuff in general, but that would be stuff that would have to be baked into that software. Not stuff I don't think you could like Jimmy rig at the last second.
Okay. But it wouldn't be so great at telling you, because of blood pressure, because of SpO2, this patient is trending like a pneumothorax or a hemothorax. Is that correct?
Right. So yeah, that's a really interesting point, right? So I think that's where we're kind of on the bleeding edge of trying to get it to do those things. I think it's not there yet in a regular large language model to be able to tell you that, right? Like I think those things are not where it's solid, right? I think it's solid where you go, hey, this is what's going on with the patient. I've tried all this. I'm not really sure. what's going on. And it might come up with some edge diagnosis that you haven't thought of, that it might be able to tell you what's going on. In that situation, right, the more you can give it, the more you can feed it, the better. And I would say in those situations, don't bother typing it all in, right? Just take pictures of as much of it as you can, and then it will just be able to take the data out of that, right? So anything from a screenshot, and then you just give it the screenshot of all the vitals, it can pull all those vitals out, right? And put it in a table. And then the second part of it is then looking at that to see if it's guessing what's going on. So it's really good at pulling the data out from an image and kind of recognizing that stuff. But I would say, what we see a lot kind of in the behavior when using our software, right, is if someone's if someone goes to it right away at the very beginning, right, it depends again which one you're looking at, you don't want to get kind of blinders on and go down the path it's telling you, because again, it doesn't really know what's right and wrong if you're looking at a large language model, right? So with those large language models, it's really more for in the diagnosis stage, like looking at everything going on and looking at things that are stumping you, right? That you're just not remembering or not guessing. And you're like, hey, like, I don't know what's going on with this guy, dude. Like, I tried all this stuff, nothing's working, right? Let me then like put it in there. I think that's a really good time to use it for that type of scenario. But again, like, you have to always remember like what the data it's looked at to understand this, right? It's consumed everything on the internet, and we all know like how much the truth on the internet can vary. It does not have a filter for what is true and false for what it saw. It just knows how many times it's seen something. So like you always have to have that kind of, measure of wit about you to really understand like, hey, like, okay, you're telling me this, like, and you can't really ask it how it came to that. Because again, that's also something most of the large language models are working on right now. You really just have to decide for yourself if it's really giving you something that you didn't think of or not. But you cannot imagine there's this big black box of just knowledge that can answer that question, right? That's not what it's really designed for at first. Like, that's not really like the first purpose of where it's going.
And I imagine if you're using it early, kind of like, I don't know, almost like telemedicine, it gives you information just like maybe that provider would tell you things early. And you kind of, like you mentioned, that the blinders is almost like confirmation bias. Like, oh yeah, now I start to see what you were thinking. I also see that. I'm doing the right thing, and I just keep trudging forward when that was not it at all.
Right, 100%. And I think really like when you're looking for a real factual thing, right? When you're looking for a dose, when you're looking for something like that, right? There's different products, right, that like will answer that truthfully and will answer truthfully every single time, right? You'll know exactly what doses, mandated out of, RMHB, or it'll know exactly what the CPG says on XYZ, right? And those are the products that like you can trust for that, the products that are built for those things, right? Going to a regular commercial large language model to answer that's not really where its strong suit is. That's not really what it was designed for, right? And so I think it's really important to say like, hey, when I'm figuring out when I'm trying to look for a diagnosis and I'm having a really hard time finding it, no matter what I'm throwing at this patient, like nothing seems to be getting them to where I want them to be. I think that's where it kind of can possibly give you something good, but you have to be very cautious with like the quality of what's coming out. But it could still possibly, right? Might actually help you, right? With going down the wrong path. But again, like for standard stuff, right? Like, hey, what's the dose for this? What's the dose for that? That's not the big caution sign around that part.
Okay. It's almost like, when you start kind of vapor locking and you forget, it's kind of like that partner that you can turn to and be like, what was the dose for? Or,
right.
What was the next step for that
and
kind
that's
of thing?
What some AI does, but it's not it's not your standard classic commercial large language models, right? It's other products that can do that stuff, right? That are built specifically to be like, hey, right? It's called deterministic, right? You want something where it goes like, I know that there is one thing and this is the answer to that thing. And no matter how you ask me, I'm consistently going to give you the right answer to this thing because I understand what that is. Right? In a lot of the commercial LLMs out there, right, that is not at all, right, like the intent or the purpose, right? It is more like hypothesize on this, right? Like think about that, right? Pull all this information together, and based on trends you see and where that information leads you, that's where it goes, right? That's why those edge diagnoses might actually be something it's useful with, or we'll hear stories about that, right? Because then it's seeing all the different or it's trying to figure out what all the different diagnoses were out there, right? And really just statistical, looking at the words. And it's just saying like, hey, yeah, this word was tied to these things in other places that I saw it, so I'll display that word as well. And that's where it'll find, right, this really interesting stuff for you, right, that you might have not thought of.
Now I'm thinking maybe a little bit harder, but I don't know, maybe it seems like it could be something. It's kind of like triage. You know, even if just we're looking at a mass casualty, I have 5 people, I have 7, like not an inordinate amount of people, but it's incredibly dynamic. And I may not be able to just sort through it on my own all at once to say, all right, patient alpha goes second, patient bravo goes, first, and so down the line. And, these group of people need to go to, the level 1, and these people can go to level 2, and et cetera, rapidly. Could AI help with that kind of triage process for you, and to say like, hey, this patient is probably not going to make it?
Right. Yeah, it can. It depends on which one you're talking about. So kind of the big commercial ones, I would say probably not, right? And the amount of time it's going to take you to feed that data in for it to have enough data to create some sort of statistic of it seeing the same things and then sorting it properly, it won't be able to do that. Again, there's other software that is out there that can do that sort of stuff. But that's more like custom tailored software, right? Software that like you can't just get off the shelf.
Yeah. No, I wasn't thinking about loading that into Chat GPT, but I mean,
yes.
as far as large language models or specific brackets of AI, is that something that it would do well at?
Yeah, 100%. Right. So if the software is designed to follow like a classic triage algorithm, right? Like the stuff we are trained at, like black, red, yellow, green, right? That I was trained on too, right? And kind of sifting through those patients, like, yes, it is absolutely, there are definitely things out there that do that. Right? Stuff that, plenty of companies do. But yeah, there are things out there that do that sort of thing. Even I know plenty of the 2 or 3 products come to my mind that, I've seen throughout the DoD that does that kind of out of box now.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, especially when it comes to medicine, if something goes wrong, everybody instantly wants to blame somebody, and it's like, it's never me. And like you mentioned, AI has been around for a hot minute. Who do they blame? Like when a person is inputting information into, and I'm not talking specifically Muru, but I'm talking about just any AI program out there. Like somebody's going to be liable because the machine can only do so much. It can give you a suggestion. It's not going to do it for you. I guess, how does that stuff get sorted out?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. So I will tell you that, like for us and, I'm sure other companies out there, right? There is a ton of time and energy spent on what you put in cannot be tracked back to you, right? Like like if you are using this thing as a place to go to get assistance, then you are assuming it is helping you as best as it can, but it is not also, big brother tattling on you to something else. With that, right, like we have seen several data leaks from kind of the commercial large language models out there. Very few, but a few. And I will say, right, from the software development side, right, if you do not specifically build it to not track something, right, to not tie those queries back to an individual, it is absolutely able to tie them back. So unless you like have a high confidence that the organization isn't doing that, the organization specifically tells you there's no way to do it, right? There are ways for that stuff to always get back to exactly who did it at the exact time and the exact way they did it and everything about it. So, right, I would say like make sure whichever product you're using, right, especially if you're worried about that sort of thing, that you're either hosting it locally on your device where that information cannot ever get anywhere because it was processed on your laptop, right, and then it stayed there and you deleted it afterwards, or that the software specifically is built to not do that, right? So like, we take painstaking work, and I'm sure other people do as well, to say like login is one thing, but like what you do inside is your business and no one else's. And it can't be tied back to, Dennis being able to come to me and be like, what the heck did you ask in that? Like, we don't want that ever in there. But I will say, right, like with commercial LLMs, right, you are talking about, there's like two ways that data, that privacy can be violated, right? One is like specifically saying we can see exactly what that user did. The other way, right, which is just like, let's look at the log and somehow that data gets out there. Again, tons of security, I'm sure, employed at all the major companies to make sure that doesn't happen, but there's still cases where it has. And the other one is you put something into a model and then the model trains off that, right? So talking about kind of from your guys' world, right? And sometimes when we have these conversations with SOCOM units who use our stuff, right? You want to, if a model is allowed to do that, right? And that data is allowed for it to be trained on, right? There are companies who have used large language, there are scenarios where big companies have used large language models to help them code, and they were coding, proprietary secrets of their own. And then the AI was like, oh, that was cool. Like no one else has given me that before. Okay, I'm going to start answering based off that, or I'm going to answer based off that and other stuff. So those are kind of two different ways to do it, right? One is to actually be able to see exactly what Dennis searched, right? The other way is to say, well, Dennis asked this really interesting question, and we haven't seen a lot of other data like that on that question before. And so now we're going to start answering questions or giving stuff back because, out of all the stuff we've searched, the only stuff that answered or had a statistical probability to be the same thing is the stuff that Dennis wrote. And so without it tying directly back to, now it's in there and it's out there. And once it's in there, there's no way to really pull it back out.
Yeah. Because I could see, I guess, a problem is, I guess it can be a double-edged sword. AI recommends whatever, answer X. The human in me, if it doesn't, because I have some practice, I might not like that perfectly. It doesn't really match what I think perfectly. So I might modify it. Somebody else sees that and is like, hey, you deviated from protocol. I flame you, even though you had a good outcome. The other side of that coin, I don't do what it told me to do, and we had a really bad outcome. And it's, now we're blaming back and forth. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like legally at the end of the day, right? It's your patient, you're the provider, right? It's your patient, you are responsible for those patients' decisions, right? And a big part of what we do, and I know what a lot of other companies do, right, is to make sure like, hey, I'm showing you exactly where I get that information from and that data from. But that is software that's custom built for that. That's not like a commercial LLM and what you're going to get out of that. So right at the end of the day, it's always you, right? It's the difference between a medical device being certified by the FDA and not, right? Is that medical device in between the clinician and the patient, or is that medical device before the clinician makes a decision? I go to defibrillator and I say, give 200 joules biphasic to the patient, right? I have told a medical device to execute a procedure. And then once I click that shock button, the medical device is the one actually delivering it. That means it has to be FDA cleared. That means if it does something wrong, it's on, right? If you tell it 200 and it does, 360 monophasic or something instead, right? Or whatever it is, or 50, right? That was that device, and that's why the device has to be FDA cleared. But the reason advisory software does not in the same way, right, is that it is supposed to give you advice on what to do. But then at the end of the day, it's you, right? I've used the classic example that if someone told you to put like an auto injector through an eyeball, like you should probably be like, whoa, wait a minute. Like that doesn't sound right. Right. And you should pump the brakes on it and double check what you're looking at. But right, you're the one certified, licensed, whatever you want to call it, to do that work. And it's always on, right? It's always on the medic to know what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I just kind of wanted to reiterate at least my thought on it, and I'm glad you agreed with it. But like you mentioned, this is not just a box of knowledge you're carrying around and it'll tell you exactly what to do in every situation. You have to be the provider. You have to take in information. This is just to augment, to help, to advise. You still have to be the provider, take that information in and execute on the patient.
Right. And based on the tool you're using, right, you got to know which tool it is and then what's its ability to hypothesize and be very broad versus what's its ability to understand things and be able to answer with like precision and confidence, right? And know like I only know true false versus most AI out there, right? Is true and false is not even a concept, right? It's not even something it's attempting to consider.
Okay. Does it have like its own internal confidence interval? Like I'm 50-50 on this, but I'm going to give you one answer.
Yeah, sure. So that's based on still understanding true false. And I cannot tell you enough that your question is still based on it understands this true false concept. It's going, I think this is the next best word to come up because it sounds like what's right based on what I'm seeing out there, right? Just being what it sounds like is right, right? Not that the words are correct, right? Like, I think you should push blue in an IV to the patient. What blue? Like, that's not even a medicine, right? And like, you have to understand that like in that moment, right? It doesn't understand what a medicine is not. It just knows that the next word that sounded the best was that. So like, yeah, there again, kind of classic example, right? Like that confidence interval is really like, you're like, oh, what about, and that's not how it's thinking through it.
I guess kind of going more into what it can't do. Okay. Mm-hmm. I think I got a decent idea of what it can and the reliability, I guess, or how it does its thing. Fairly recently, I saw that AI had done its own surgery using robotics. Mm-hmm. And so beginning to end. Can we just like make a trauma surgeon into a robot and then just drop him into battle to do this stuff?
Right. Yeah. It's an interesting question, right? And like I've been in a bunch of military conferences in the last 6 months, and I hear that stuff come up a lot, right? We've gotten tons of questions on it personally in our own company, right? Being approached about that stuff. It's an interesting question, right? The short answer is kind of, right? The longer answer is like, it depends on what it's being trained on. It depends on what data it had to get started with, right? It depends on what it's seen in the past, right? Like what was the percentage? How many times have I seen them make the incision here versus here? How long have I seen the incision, right? And how many hundreds of times have I seen it? And were those successful or not successful, right? We all know as medics, right? You can see two guys do the same procedure and one is done because it's an experienced hand and it really knows what it's supposed to do. And another is, doesn't get the same outcome even though they're attempting to do the same thing because it's just, there's not that level of experience there. And so I think based on it seeing enough good things, enough proper procedures, but identifying what those is I think is the trick, right? Like who's judging the quality of it before it feeds it into the system. And so, yeah, in some ways it can, right? Like, I think it's just like anything else, one step at a time in that direction. But at the same time, like, I mean, as a medic myself, I think it's a better assistant and helper in the medic being a better medic, right? And being like a force multiplier for that medic, rather than saying, I think we're a long way away from replacing the medic, right? If ever, right? And I really mean that, like, as a medic myself, right? Like, that is not the goal. That's not the intent from our side, right? I know other people are saying, better to not send someone in when you don't have to have that risk. But I think there's many, many steps to be seen out there when this podcast gets very old, before we'll be at that ability to do that, right?
Okay. And is it just because it's too dynamic? Like, I think I forget what procedure was done using AI, but I'm willing to bet it was not, damage control surgery after, a massive, car accident. I'm willing, if I had to guess, it was like, an appendectomy or something that's very routine, very low risk and relatively simple. And that would just make sense for like the first one. I would imagine, something as complex as damage control surgery, you don't just have one procedure that's relatively bloodless. You have a train wreck that rolls in, and you have to use that experience to figure out, what do I do first? You know, I mean, am I at all on track? Like, does it able to like prioritize? Like, I need to do this in this kind of order, or is it more like I can do that one and execute?
I think it includes, it's two questions, right? One, is it seen enough on all the different procedures to know how to do them individually? And then two, is it seeing enough data on those things, looking at those looking at those looking at those patients with multiple problems going on, right? And being able to, like, how many decisions that it has been able to record has done that, right? And I think the third part is, are there really enough sensors to get that information, right? The classic example on my side, right? I'll walk in and I'll see a patient that got injured, right, and hurt, and an EMT, like, and on my team may not remember that, like, oh, they're wearing lace-up boots, and we should probably check to see if there's like a compound fracture under there while we're doing the rapid trauma assessment, right? Versus, someone else will just be like, oh, like, anything unclothed looks decently fine. Let's just, let's throw them on the stretcher and take them to the hospital, right? And the same thing if you're looking at, on the civilian side, diabetic, right? Like, you may walk in and see them a little altered, but until you touch the skin and feel that it's sticky, you don't know that they were diaphoretic, 4 hours ago and it's dried, right? And now like, oh wait, this is like a hypoglycemia issue, right? And I think the question is, does it have enough? First, has it seen enough procedures done well, right? Seen enough guys who really know what they're doing to go, okay, I can follow the things they've done. And then two is, does it have enough data and sensors coming in to pick up on all those things that, I haven't seen a lot of sensors out there judging, like, stickiness of the skin, right? Like, it's not out there yet. And so, like, for it to make those decisions, you have to think it's blinded from that stuff, right? There's no sensor judging that. It's only basing it off vitals. It's only basing it off, a GCS score that someone told. It's only basing it off pupils, right? It's only basing, what is it basing it off of to understand, like, where to go? And those things get more complex. Those things get more variability, right? And so I think we are, let it do those small procedures first. Let it get really good at those, which would be, millions of those procedures, right? To even get started, to really say that it's seen enough variability, right? Like, in AI, there is something called synthetic data, where AI has consumed all the data on the planet, right, already on the internet, and it's still not enough data. And so there now is other AI that just creates data for the other one to consume. So you're literally talking about data being like, it's guessing as to what data it should create, so that another thing can then read off that data. So,
okay,
like,
is that good
general
data?
AI, huh?
Is that good data?
That's the real question, right? And so that's why I say, like, I think we're a ways off from anything like that, right? I think it'll have its day in many other ways first, right? Before it can ever get to that stage, right? Because that level of data, that level of is just, to my knowledge, right, and to what we've been doing, is not out there, right? I mean, we take a very different approach to it than that, based on what's available. Then kind of just, it's just going to show up and look at this, this patient after an explosion or after a pressure wave has gone through that patient or something like that, and we're just going to be able to make these decisions, right? There's a long way away from that.
Now, I mean, AI, from when I first heard about it to like today, so it's only been really a few years.
Right.
I think that it's been like mainstream kind of popular. And it's progressed, pretty rapidly. In the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, like, how far can you imagine it's going to go? Or like, what is it even bothering? Is AI trending in medicine at all? Or is it just, AI pictures and, more humanized replies?
Right. So, yeah. So first I would say, like, I don't know if you remember, but, when we started our company, back in the 2010s, right? Like, blockchain was kind of like a big thing, right? And it was a huge technology that came out. We still see it today in a ton of different places, right? Blockchain technology, right? Like in crypto and things like that, and other healthcare reports things. But, right, I still think everyone's trying to figure out where it's best applied and what's going on, right? I think it's here to stay, but exactly where it pushes forward, right? Everyone's trying to apply different types of models, different AI scenarios in order to see what's going to work. And I think that's kind of like to say, we don't know where it's going to go yet. It's going to be here, right? It's here to stay. It's here to stay in a lot of different ways. But exactly what it's going to do, everything sounds cool at the beginning, right? But I'm sure, as you know, and something I would teach my guys when I was running my MS company was, 80% of the way there is not 100% of the way there. And while it could look cool, while it can act cool, right? At the end of the day, can it actually perform and get the work done? And that's interesting, right? And we just, to be determined. I think some interesting places it's going, right, is first just the tech itself, right? So right now, like, we can talk, and I'd love to tell your guys about kind of, everyone listening about like what they could do now to get it locally on a device. So if they don't have internet connection, they can go somewhere and use it. But that's going to get smaller and easier over time, right? We're not seeing a lot of it on a phone yet, right? We're seeing it that we can put a model on a laptop, but on a phone is still pretty hard for it to process. So there will be, instead of large language models, small language models, right? Which is focused on one specific area, right? Healthcare, or even more specific, like pre-hospital care. And then once it gets down to that level, and as the models get smaller and smaller, right, I think an interesting part is that we'll be able to get on smaller devices using less power, using less space, requiring less capability of a device to do. I think that's coming, right, as soon as it can be. But right, we got to kind of get the models lower, easier to use, and the tech, better at handling more. So, the processors. So I think that's part of it. Some of the stuff I'm really excited about in just kind of like large scale AI is, I think, kind of like looking at different parts of a patient, being able to classify that image, right? I think that's really interesting, right? Let's look at a wound and let's figure out like what stage it's at, right? How far it's developed, right? How much necrosis we're seeing, right? Let's be able to take that in a really, non-permissive environment and be able to just take that picture and have a much higher level of confidence or certainty about what we're looking at. I think that type of image generation, that image recognition is really cool. And then also on the truth side, right? Being able for it to be able to explain how it got those answers. I don't know if we'll ever get there for large language models, but I'm hoping it gets to it. And then kind of on the image creation, right? Being able for me to talk to a patient that I cannot translate with, right? And either using Google Translate or one of the other models to be able to communicate is one thing, but to be able to create images or graphs or, diagrams to be like, here's how to do that thing right after they stop by my clinic, and just be able to give them that image and put it on their phone and have it create an image that's good enough, would be really great, right? Right now, moving things around on an image and putting it in the right spot is really hard for image creation. That's why you get, people with 6 fingers on a hand, or, something's in the wrong spot. So I think as it does that, I think kind of being able to explain how to do medicine to people who don't know, as you're giving them advice when you discharge them, or giving them advice on what to do after that, I think that'll get pretty advanced pretty soon. I see a lot of work there.
Awesome. I just kind of, I guess, thought of a new question, but medicine changes, and it can change fairly rapidly. And you change one thing about medicine, and that kind of spirals out to a bunch of different areas.
Yep.
When your AI is constantly learning, I'm guessing, how does one change here where, let's say, giving blood for trauma, that's only been, the last, at least pre-hospitally, especially on the EMS side, like that's been the last 18 months.
Yep. Still brand new. A lot of places don't have it.
Yeah. I guess, can AI, learn like, hey, that's a real thing, and it kind of spreads it out? Or is the developer have to go in and change how the AI thinks in each kind of area? Does that make sense?
Yep. So again, something we spend a lot of time on. So for like a large language model, that's not so easily done, right? You can't tweak a single answer to a single thing. You need a piece of software that is built to be able to say, okay, we've changed the protocol, right? And I'm only basing it off these protocols. I'm going to follow that. So when the protocol gets updated, I can now answer that question based on the newest way to do something, right? Whether that's a CPG or, on the civilian side, a classic protocol set being ready. So there are softwares that do that, but that's not right with a large language model, right? You're looking at percentages of something coming up. So you would have to see that thing come up over and over and over again and outpace the other thing that was done before it would be able to identify it, right? Or before it's meaningful enough to be able to pick it up. So I think a lot of that stuff you'll see slower over time. I think a way to kind of jerry rig it to do it now would be to say, take something and be like, here's these 5 documents, right? Answer questions based off those documents. I think that's a way that you could get a large language model to do something. But again, it's still based on percentage of what it's seen out there. And right, really hard to get any of those things to go in. And developers cannot just go in and tweak that directly, right? A model is answering all questions across a huge swath of stuff. And so you can tweak the model to try and say, like, if you see something newer, but again, like how it sees that is pretty hard. So really, healthcare focused software that like is built for that is really where you would have to go for that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And I imagine like it would help in research if the AI can say, hey, there's less data in this area than, all these other areas.
Right.
And that being said, research comes back. Sometimes it's bullshit research.
Sometimes it's not research at all. Sometimes it just sounds like research. So when you say like, give me a bunch of quotes for a piece of data, it will create in a piece of data that it just sounds like Jack Smith sounds better than John Smith. So you know what? Jack Smith is the name we're going to put. Right. So yeah, a lot is the case. I would say that there's some interesting stuff going on right now with some of the big ones, the consumer ones that we talk about. They call it deep research now, and deep research allows it to run for a lot longer to create a much longer and more, more detailed answer than it would normally because it's supposed to be going so fast. And so we're seeing that just come out very recently. And so that deep research, again, like if you're stuck and you can't figure out what to do and you have some time, the deep research is really great, right? Because it can kind of look for a longer period of time and come up with more and more information, right? But sometimes deep research could put out a 40-page document for you, instead of just answering a specific question. So
when it comes to AI, if you had the opportunity to say like, hey, like, of the stuff coming out in healthcare, I really wish everybody knew this aspect of it. Maybe something that you get a lot during conferences and you're just getting tired of answering it. What would that be?
Sure. Yeah. So first, I think, and I wanted to bring this up too, for a lot of people watching this who may or may not have good internet connection, right? Like, I think they, I'll give a shout out to one company right now. There's something called Jan AI, JAN.ai. It's a product that you can just download on your device and then download on your laptop and be able to run any one of a number of different models locally. So you don't have to have that security risk of having it go back up and do that. So I think that's a really interesting place if people want to use it now, right? And you have a laptop where you're allowed to download that stuff too. Right. Getting that off, you can download it in a few seconds and puts a few gigabytes of a model on, and then you can start using it where you go, wherever. I think that's a good one. I think my biggest thing is to say, right, like all tech is not all knowing, and like, don't discount your experience, right? Like a lot of humble people want to be like, I don't know, right? And I'm open to advice and I'm open to whatever. But I have to say, like, unless it's specifically built to answer specific questions, right? Like the clinician is still the clinician, and that's not something that's going to be replaced anytime soon, right? That's not something we can just, right? You're looking for things that make you faster and quicker at what you do, but that's giving you better data, right? Feeding it into you more, but not making the decision for you. I think that's still a long way to go. And I think when I wish what people knew how to do, I would say use it for what it's good for, right? Take 3 pages of vital signs and here's just an image of them that I've been writing down on a notebook. Put them in a table and graph them out for me, right? Or calculate all my maps for the last 3 days. So we're going to blood pressure, right? Here's all the meds I've been giving, right? Summarize and write this up, or like pull all the top pieces together so I can hand it off to someone else really fast. Like, those are the things that I think it's really great at. And those are the things I really want people to use it more and more for, right? And not just, there'll always be new tech, but, Just because it's a black box doesn't mean it's all known.
Makes sense. Well, thank you, Steve. I really appreciate you jumping on.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to help. And anyone has any questions, feel free to find me on LinkedIn or wherever. Always happy to answer.
That's it for today's podcast. Make sure to go to our website, www.prolongedfieldcare.org. Check out our free downloads and a ton of other helpful information. Grab a bag of our fresh roasted PFC coffee, links in the description below, and stay on the bleeding edge of combat and austere medicine. This is Dennis for the PFC podcast. Out.